Long ago in Israel, there lived a widow and her two sons. Life had not been easy for them. The woman's husband had died, leaving the family heartbroken and struggling to survive. Her husband had been a faithful servant of God, but before he died, he had borrowed money that he could not repay. Now the debt remained, and the creditors wanted their money. Day after day, the widow worried. She had no way to pay what she owed. One day, the creditors gave her terrible news. "If you cannot pay your debt," they said, "we will take your two sons to work as slaves." The widow was devastated. She could not bear the thought of losing her children. Feeling helpless and afraid, she decided to seek help from God's prophet Elisha. With tears in her eyes, she went to him and cried out, "My husband is dead, and you know that he feared the Lord. But now the creditors are coming to take my two sons as slaves." Elisha listened carefully. Then he asked her a simple question. "What do you have in your house?" The widow thought for a moment. She looked at her nearly empty home and replied, "Your servant has nothing at all, except a small jar of olive oil." It didn't seem like much, but God was about to do something amazing with that small jar. Elisha gave the widow some unusual instructions. "Go and borrow empty jars from all your neighbors," he said. "Don't borrow just a few. Borrow as many as you can." The widow may not have fully understood why, but she chose to obey. She and her sons went from house to house, asking their neighbors for empty jars. Soon they had gathered many jars, large jars, small jars, and everything in between. When they returned home, Elisha gave another instruction. "Go inside your house with your sons and shut the door. Then pour oil from your small jar into all the empty jars." The widow and her sons did exactly as Elisha said. Inside the quiet house, they began to work. The widow picked up her small jar of oil and started pouring. Oil flowed into the first jar, then into the second, then the third, and the oil kept coming. The widow looked at the jar in her hand. It should have been empty by now, but it wasn't. Her sons quickly brought more jars. "Here's another one, Mother." She poured again, and again, and again. Every jar was filled to the very top. The widow could hardly believe her eyes. The little jar of oil never seemed to run out. Her sons continued bringing more containers. The miracle continued, jar after jar, container after container. The oil kept flowing. Finally, after all the jars had been filled, the widow said, "Bring me another jar." But one of her sons replied, "There are no more jars left." At that moment, the oil stopped flowing. The miracle had filled every available container. The widow's house, once nearly empty, was now filled with jars of valuable oil. God had provided far more than she ever imagined. Excited and amazed, she hurried back to Elisha and told him everything that had happened. Elisha smiled and said, "Go, sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left." What wonderful news! The widow sold the oil. She paid every debt she owed. The creditors could no longer take her sons. Her family was saved. God had taken the little she had and turned it into more than enough. What can we learn from this story? Sometimes we look at our problems and think we don't have enough. Not enough money, not enough strength, not enough resources, not enough answers. But God sees things differently. The widow only had a small jar of oil, yet God used that small gift to meet a very big need. This story reminds us that God can do great things with what seems small in our hands. When we trust Him, obey Him, and place what we have in His hands, He is able to provide in ways we never expected. The widow's miracle began with faith and obedience. And her story reminds us that God's provision is never limited by our circumstances. No matter how impossible a situation may seem, God is able to make a way. So the next time you feel like you don't have enough, remember the widow and her jar of oil. What seems small to you may be more than enough for God to use. And that's the amazing lesson of the widow's oil, a miracle of God's provision.